Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee. And for today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the newest album by British punk rock, post-punk, new wave, MTV, fashion, and well, all around pop culture icon, the immortal Mr. Billy Idol. The name of his latest release is Dream Into It. Now, Billy Idol is somebody that I am a huge fan of, and I have been for a substantial period of time. If my memory serves me correctly, the first time I really remember listening to Billy Idol in very much regularity was back in the early to mid 1980s. Probably around 1983 or 1984, driving around in my mom's car. Now, back in those days, my mom had 2 or 3 different cassettes that sort of lived in her car, and they just got played over and over and over again. So much, in fact, that it got to the point to where I pretty much knew every song on each one of those cassettes by heart. Now, back in those days, one of the cassettes that lived in my mother's car was this compilation album, which is called Summer Fun Volume 2. Now, back in those days, looking back on it, I would make the suggestion that both of my parents were reasonably big music fans. I think that they both had pretty decent taste in music, but what is curious about this particular album, Summer Fun Volume 2, is this album doesn't really reflect the type of music that I associate with my mother. This compilation features artists such as Tony Basil, Billy Idol, Flock of Seagulls, OXO, Rick Springfield, and Devo, just to mention a few. Now, these were not bands that got a lot of heavy rotation in my house. So for the life of me, I will never understand what inspired my mom to purchase this cassette and to listen to it with as much regularity as she did. Now, this is not the cassette in question that lived in my mother's car back in the 1980s. I actually found this copy of this cassette at a record store in San Francisco several years ago in a box full of $1 cassettes, and I remember seeing it and just being hit with this flood of memories driving all over Northern California listening to this album. This album to me is like a personal time machine. Now, the Billy Idol album, or I should say the Billy Idol song which is featured on this album, is the song Hot in the City, which even back in those days was not my favorite Billy Idol song. Still far from one of my favorite Billy Idol songs. But whenever I hear the song Hot in the City, it always makes me think of this particular album. Now, the first time I really remember seeing Billy Idol and really being able to put a face to his music was probably around this same time, probably 1983, 84, maybe 1985. I've said this on this channel before. I was relatively lucky as a wee lad that we got MTV in my house pretty early on, and MTV was something that I was immediately sucked into. I always sort of half joke that MTV for me was a surrogate parent. If I was not at school or out on my bicycle, it was pretty easy to find me sitting in front of the television watching MTV. And one day in particular, I remember being confronted by somebody that I had never seen before. Now, keep in mind, this was the 1980s, and every artist on MTV, at least aesthetically, was more outrageous than the last. But there was just something about this particular gent's image that I found to be quite striking, and the video in question was the title track of Billy Idol's 1983 album, Rebel Yell, and I remember it coming on the MTV, and I literally sat back because I could not believe what I was seeing. Now, I was sitting in the room with my dad, who is an artist, and he was sort of working on an art project, and I asked him, I said, "Dad, what is that? Who is that guy?" And I remember my dad looking up, sort of half interested, because my dad was not of the MTV generation. My dad did not have a lot of use for the music that was being played on MTV. And he looked up and he said, sort of half interestedly, he said, "He's punk. That's punk." And I remember sort of inwardly, I sort of recoiled, because back in those days, if you remember in the 1980s, the way that punk or punk rock was portrayed in the media, it was always in a negative light. I mean, a perfect example of that is the cult classic film, one of the greatest movies of all time, by the way, The Class of 1984. The way that they portray the sort of punk rock characters in that film was very typical of the way that punk and punk rock were portrayed in the media. So I remember as a kid thinking to myself, like, I don't want any part of that guy. I am a good kid. Now, right around this same period of time, I had a friend. Well, let's be honest with each other. He wasn't really a friend. He was somebody that I was occasionally forced to hang out with because our mothers were friends. And when we would hang out in these sort of family get-togethers, he was nice enough to me. Now, the same can't be said for when I would run into him at school, but that's not really the point here. The point is that our mothers were friends, so he and I were sort of forced to hang out. Our dads were sort of forced to hang out because of the fact that our mothers were friends. And he had this older sister. Now, back in those days, she was probably 3 or 4 years older than we were. We were in grammar school, and she was in middle school, and I got to tell you, there was just something about this girl that I thought she pretty much walked on water. I think it's safe to say that she might have been my first crush. I thought that she was the coolest thing on two wheels. And I remember one day, this guy and I broke into his sister's room when she was not at home. Now, there was just something very exotic about being in a middle school girl's room. I felt as if I was in the Emerald City. I was in the Forbidden Zone, if you understand what I'm saying. And I remember walking into her room, and I couldn't help but notice that her walls were completely blanketed with images of 2 different artists, one of which was Adam Ant, who at the time didn't really mean much to me, but the other one was this guy that I had just sort of recently discovered on MTV, this guy Billy Idol, this guy that I thought was just the most dangerous and scary thing that I've ever seen. And the fact that she liked him made her seem even cooler, even more untouchable than she already was. Now, as far as my fandom goes, I would say that my fandom of Billy Idol didn't really spawn until probably the fall of 1994. I graduated from high school in the spring of 1994, and I moved out of my parents' house, which was something that we used to do back in those days, and I began taking college classes in my hometown, and I sort of befriended a couple of guys that were in one of my classes. Now, looking back on it, I don't know that we were necessarily the snuggest of chums, but these were 2 guys that apparently didn't really mind my company, and at the time, I didn't really have many friends. So you know what they say about beggars, don't you? So sometimes we would carpool to school together, and on our way to and from school, we would listen to music, and we would talk, and we would get back into town, and we would just sort of cruise around the town listening to music. Now, back in those days, again, if you're old enough to remember, there was something that most people, including myself, had in their cars back in those days, and this is what it is. This is a CD book. I still have several of these CD books laying around. Now, most of my CDs are actually on shelves, but I do have a few of these CD books. Now, these were something that would live in most people's cars. I had one as well. Now, these were sort of multifunctional tools. Not only were these a good way to transport your tunage around in a convenient manner, but also if you had other people riding in your car, these CD books sort of functioned as a way for your friends to sort of bust your balls, because inevitably your CD book would sort of live in the backseat of your car, because of course you can't reach it back there when you're driving, but it would live back in the backseat of your car. And if you had a few friends in your car, inevitably one of the people sitting in your backseat would start digging through your CD book, at which point in time they took it as an opportunity to bust your balls over your music taste. I remember people saying, "Hey Jim, Tiffany, that's weak, son." And of course, if you're sort of self-conscious about your music taste, you have to sort of make excuses. I remember thinking to myself, or saying out loud, "Tiffany, oh my God, I would never listen to that. I mean, I had a girl in here the other night. Perhaps she might have left it." Actually, there were 2 girls, if you understand what I'm saying. And perhaps one of them left that Tiffany CD in my car. "You know I would never listen to Tiffany, man." And the other guys in your car, knowing that you tend to strike out with the fair sex, like, yeah, 2 girls in here, didn't you, Jim? You love Tiffany, I know it. But anyway, one day, me and these 2 guys were driving around our hometown of Chico, California after class, and I was sitting in the back seat keeping the CD book company when the driver of the car suggested that I pick out the next album that we were going to be listening to. And as I was thumbing through his CD book, I remember stumbling upon this CD by an artist named Billy Idol. Now, when I saw the name Billy Idol, now by this point in time, my taste in music had evolved to the point to where I was really into bands like the Butthole Surfers and the Dead Milkmen and Rollins and Black Flag. So I had sort of begun getting into that sort of wave of quote-unquote alternative music and punk rock, but hadn't really delved too much into the previous generation of that style of music. And I remember seeing this album, Rebel Yell, by Billy Idol, and I remember thinking at the time how funny it was that he had this old CD by this old artist by the name of Billy Idol. Now, keep in mind, this was 1994, and Rebel Yell came out in 1983. So, yeah, the album was 11 years old at this point in time, but looking back on it, 11 years old is not really an old album. Now, if, like me, you were 18 or 19 years old, yeah, it seems like an old album. It seems like that's over half your life ago. I remember watching that guy on MTV when I was still, leaving skids in my trunk, so it seemed like old music, but I thought to myself, hey, I remember this guy. I want to listen to this album, Rebel Yell. So I handed it up, and the guy, I remember commenting, he's like, oh yeah, man, I love this. So he put on Rebel Yell, and he cranked it up, and we were driving around our hometown listening to the album Rebel Yell by Billy Idol. And I don't know what it was. There was just something about that day. Perhaps it was just that perfect day. Maybe it was just that experience. Maybe it was the company of these two guys, but I had never heard any music at that point in time that ever sounded any better to me than that particular time I listened to Rebel Yell. So later that same day, after those guys had dropped me off at my apartment, I ski-daddled it as soon as I could down to one of my local record stores where I purchased, in one stop, I purchased 3 albums by Billy Idol. I purchased that album, Rebel Yell. I also purchased his 1982 self-titled debut album, as well as the 1986 album, Whiplash Smile. Now, one thing about those days, back in the mid-1990s, in the town that I lived in, a town called Chico, where I was living and going to school, Chico was a relatively small town. It is a college town. It is a town that I have a lot of fond memories, a place that I go back to in fairly heavy regularity because my dad still lives there. And at the time, despite the fact that it wasn't really a huge town, we had 4 thriving record stores in our little downtown area, probably 6 or 8 blocks, square blocks. And we had 4 thriving record stores in our downtown. So I remember going down to one of the record stores downtown. Don't remember exactly which one it was at this point in time, although I would bet, because it was always my first stop, I would bet it was this place called The Underground. And I remember finding these 3 Billy Idol CDs. I was so jacked up after hearing Rebel Yell driving around in my friend's car, and I took these CDs up and I plopped them on the counter. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind also about this particular time is shopping in record stores, as much as it is and always has been my favorite activity. Back in those days, record store clerks could not always be the funnest individuals to deal with. Now, nowadays, because the whole record buying community is such a niche thing, it's such a community. I feel like whenever you go into a record store now, people know who you are. It's a very friendly experience. But back in those days, dealing with these clerks could be a bit of a headache. In fact, there were times, I remember, sort of feeling self-conscious, if not outright altering what my purchases were going to be based on the person that was working behind the counter and based on sort of interactions that I had with them in the past. And I remember specifically not realizing at least, how uncool I was being. I went up there and I bought 3 Billy Idol CDs in one stop. And I remember the snotty clerk kind of looked down at them disapprovingly, and then he looked up at me and said, you must be some sort of super fan, huh? And I remember saying, well, what are you, some sort of Weisenheimer? Perhaps you and I should go outside and I could sweep up the sidewalk with you, son. Or your other option is you can throw these things in a bag and you can let me get on my way. Now, that's what I thought to myself out loud. I remember thinking to myself, okay, yeah, I guess so. Sorry, sir. Sorry to inconvenience you. But I took those 3 CDs home and I listened to them and I became immediately hooked. I was instantly a huge Billy Idol fan. Over the course of the next couple of weeks, perhaps month, I had gone out and I'd finished buying up pretty much all of the Billy Idol solo albums that I could find, including a couple of bootlegs and a couple of singles. I got to the point to where I felt as if my Billy Idol collection was pretty complete. That is until one day, about a month later, I was out again at one of my local record stores where I stumbled upon a CD that literally changed my life. Now, I realize in the music fandom world, The phrase changed my life gets a little bit overused, but this album literally changed my life. It was an album that I stumbled upon totally unknowing that it even existed. One day I was in one of my local record stores, and despite the fact that I felt as if my Billy Idol collection was reasonably complete, I stumbled upon this album as I was sifting through the Billy Idol bins. Now, originally I thought that this was an album that had been misplaced either by a lazy customer or a distracted clerk, but I thought that the album cover looked interesting enough to pick up, and I remember turning it over, and on the back I recognized this individual with the bleach blonde puff as my good friend, Mr. Billy Idol. And as I began looking through the track listing, I realized that the first song was Dancing With Myself, a song that was featured on the CD I owned of Billy Idol's 1982 self-titled debut album, and I did not even know that this album existed. I had no idea that Billy Idol was in a band called Generation X. Now, I'm not saying this just to defend myself, but keep in mind, this is pre-internet, or at least it's pre-internet in its current state, so you couldn't just Google Billy Idol and figure out everything that he had done in his career. This was something that you sort of had to learn by pounding the pavement or talking to people who knew more than you did. But once I realized that this album existed and that Billy Idol was in a band previous to his solo career, I can't tell you how quickly I snatched up this album. And I mean, I literally sprinted home. If you can imagine my fat ass sprinting through Chico, California, I took the CD home, I listened to it, and it literally blew my mind. Again, I realize that that is a term that gets overused, but I cannot even begin to tell you the impact that this compilation album had on my life. Over the course of the next few weeks, it probably took me 2 or 3 weeks to go out and find out in the wild the 3 Generation X studio albums, but eventually over time I was able to secure all 3 of the original Generation X albums, and I became obsessed. Generation X was my favorite band in the world, and as an extension of that, Billy Idol was my favorite artist of all time. I mean, I have gone through some pretty obsessive music phases in my life, but I can tell you that I've never been more obsessed with an artist than I was with Generation X and Billy Idol during what I refer to as my Billy Idol phase. I absolutely became all encompassed in everything Billy Idol. Over the course of probably the next 3 or 4 years, I would say that almost everything I listened to was either Generation X or Generation X related, which in a way, I would make the argument, makes Billy Idol probably the single most recording artist in my musical autobiography, because it was through Generation X that I ended up discovering so many of the bands and so much of the music that I worship at the altar of to this day. Bands like the Sex Pistols and the Ramones and the Clash and the Jam and all the bands from that window. That is my window. My favorite era of music is that window between 1977 and 1984. And this CD, this Generation X compilation, was really my gateway into getting interested in any of that style of music. Now, of course, like I said before, I was listening to Butthole Surfers, I was listening to the Dead Milkmen, I was listening to Black Flag, Rollins, bands like that, but I had never really dove too deep into the first wave of punk rock until it was that I bought this compilation. Now, of course, at a certain point in time, I would have discovered all of that music at some point in time anyway, but this was really the gateway for me. So for me, Billy Idol still to this day, even though I wouldn't say he's my favorite, probably not even in my top 10, maybe not even in my top 20 favorite artists of all time at this point in time, he is in my life probably the single most important recording artist of all time. It got to the point where my obsession with Billy Idol just reached a crescendo. And at a certain point in time, I had decided that because I had discovered Billy Idol, had become such a huge fan, I was getting into sort of punk rock, I wanted to alter my appearance. I wanted to make my aesthetic match the way that I felt on the inside. Now, up till this point in time, I'd always pretty much had the same sort of haircut. I'd always had this sort of long, mousy-ish kind of sort of nondescript haircut. And based on the inspiration of Billy Idol, I decided that I wanted to take the plunge. I wanted to do something at the time that I thought was relatively bold. Now, before I tell this story, I want to mention one thing to you. That is that on May 16th, this past year, about a month ago. My dad's wife, Judy, passed away after a long illness. I was actually recently just back home in Chico visiting my dad. It is always really great to be back home with him. I do wish it was under better circumstances than it was on this last trip. But me and my dad are basically best friends. He and I get along. We always have such a great time together. And not that her passing was completely unexpected because she had been ill for a while, but it was still something that was very challenging for both of us. Judy is somebody that came into my life when I was roughly 6 years old through Little League Soccer. Her and my dad had been together for probably 35 years when she passed away. And when I was back home in Chico last week, or 2 weeks ago, I guess it was, I had one day where I had a little bit of free time to myself because my dad had to work. And I decided that I wanted to sort of honor my dad's wife in sort of a personal way because she had lived in that town basically her whole life. She loved that town. It's funny, I've spent my whole life kind of moving around looking for my home, whereas some people I feel like are just born in the right place in the right time, and that was her. She was born in the right city. She loved her town. She loved the place that she lived. She lived there her whole life, and through what she did for a living, I feel like she basically knew half of the people that lived in that town. Now, Chico's not a tiny town, but I feel like she pretty much knew everybody in that town. Now, her memorial service was a couple days after I left, unfortunately, but my dad told me that, of course, the place was just packed because she had lived in that town her whole life. So one day when I was out there last week, I had a little bit of free time because my dad had to work, and there's this place in Chico called Bidwell Park that I always associate with her because back in the days when my parents first started dating, my dad and his wife first started dating, it was a place that we used to hang out a lot. There's a place called Caper Acres where little kids can kind of run around. It has some ball fields. It has a swimming hole. It's basically this sort of all-encompassing park. It's beautiful. So on Wednesday when I was out there, I decided that I wanted to go out to Bidwell Park. I wanted to walk around. I wanted to listen to music. I kind of wanted to honor her because that was a place that I so associated with her. And as I was walking around Bidwell Park and I was thinking about her and all of the memories that I had with her, I think I sort of came to a conclusion or a verdict, I should say, of what my favorite memory with her was. And in a weird way, it has to do with music because everything in my life I feel like has to do with music, and it has to do with Billy Idol. Now, my dad's wife was a hairdresser by trade. She worked a chair for over 40 years, I think it was. And she was somebody that was very talented at what she did. And I remember when I decided that I wanted to sort of take a bold step, or at least what I thought was a bold step back in 1994, with my aesthetic, and it had to do with my hair. I thought that she would be a good resource, somebody that I could ask for advice. Now, what she did was something that I thought was above and beyond even what I was expecting. She told me, she said, hey, meet me at this beauty supply store. I will show you what you need to get. I will help you get the supplies, and then I will take you back to my shop, and I will do your hair for the first time, and I'll sort of show you, teach you, coach you on how you can maintain it if you end up liking it. And that's what we did. Her and I met at a Sally Beauty Supply in Chico, at which point in time she kind of walked me through what I needed to buy, all the equipment I needed to keep up this aesthetic if I liked it and I was going to move forward with it. And she took me back to her salon after hours where she cut my hair. I'd never really had short hair before. I'd always had sort of long, mousy, hippie-ish kind of nondescript hair. She cut my hair short, and I remember she started applying the bleach. Now, when she started applying the bleach, she moved me to a chair where you couldn't really see the mirror because she wanted it to be a surprise. She wanted it to be fun. She wanted it to be a big grand reveal when we were done. And I remember her and I just having a really awesome conversation about life and hair and music. And she was asking me about Billy Idol and why I was doing this to my hair. And I remember that she, like I said, she sort of moved me away from the chair to where I couldn't see what was happening as it was processing. And then she took me over to the shampoo bowl. She rinsed my hair out. She shampooed it. She styled it for me. At which point in time, she walked me back over to the mirror for the grand reveal. And I remember just being absolutely ecstatic with what I saw. I remember all I saw, apart from my hair, which is still basically the same hair that I have nowadays, although I've sort of gone through a few different versions of this. This is still basically the inspiration based on my fandom of Billy Idol back in the early 1990s. This is still the hair that I typically go by when I'm not wearing a hat at work. But I remember all I saw apart from my hair was just my teeth because I was absolutely beaming. It was such a wonderful gift that she gave me. It was such a fun day that her and I got to spend together. She gave me this incredible gift. For the first time in so long, maybe the first time in my life ever, I felt like my aesthetic on the outside matched who I was on the inside. So looking back on it, that was probably my favorite memory of my dad's wife. And as I was walking through Bidwell Park in Chico, I remember thinking about that story, and I kind of welled up a little bit. I got a little bit misty right in this region here because it is something that I'll never forget. Actually, later that day, I went and I drove past where that salon was. I actually wanted to see where that salon was. Now, I'm pretty sure it's still a salon. I don't think it's the same name of the place it was when she worked there. But after I been through the park, I wanted to see the actual shop where she did my hair because I wanted to sort of honor it. Anyway, that's not really the point here. The point is that Billy Idol sort of inspired me to get turned on to all kinds of music, all kinds of sort of lifestyle changes. Now, when this album was announced, the new album, Dream Into It, this is something that I was pretty excited about. I would say that of the albums that were coming out in 2025, it was one of the albums that I probably one of the most excited about. Now, certainly not the most excited about. The album that, of course, I'm most excited about is the Morrissey album, Bonfire of Teenagers, which has been finished since 2021, still has not seen the light of day. Now, there has been some weird sort of Morrissey news that came out this past week. I don't know really what to expect or what to believe based on what I've read, but of course, Bonfire of Teenagers is my most anticipated album of 2025, 2026, 2027, when and if it ever sees the light of day. Another album for me that I was very excited about, probably my second most anticipated album of 2025, was by a band from Chico, California, from my hometown, a band called Empty Gate. Their second album, Aphasia, came out a couple of months ago. That is an album I did a review on a few weeks ago. That is an album I absolutely love. For me, it was a little bit of a slow burn when it first came out. I love their first album, Grand Mal. Now, if you're not exactly sure who Empty Gate is a band from Chico, California. They feature one of my favorite female vocalists of all time, that being Patricia Howard, from one of my favorite bands of all time, that being the Chico, California punk rock legends called Vomit Launch. So if you haven't checked out Vomit Launch or Empty Gate, I would highly recommend it. Those were two albums for this year. I mean, Aphasia, I love that album. It wasn't necessarily as good as their first one, I thought, but to me, it's one of those albums that's kind of a slow burn. The more I've listened to it over the past couple months, the more I've liked it. When I first heard it, I don't want to say it was disappointing, but it was definitely not quite as good as the first one. Although now I've been listening to it a lot, I think it's close. But this is an album, Dream Into It by Billy Idol, that I was pretty excited about, honestly, when it first came out. He announced this record last year based on some of the singles that he's been releasing over the past, couple years. I thought that my expectations would be relatively high for it. Now, that's the thing when it comes to these bands, these artists, these sort of legacy musicians, is the expectations when these new records come out. Now, for me, my expectations are usually relatively tempered when it comes to somebody that's 70 years old, like Billy Idol is, somebody that's over almost 50 years into his career, is, don't expect it to be Valley of the Dolls. Billy Idol's not going to come back out at this point in the game, most likely, and release, the first Generation X, Valley of the Dolls, Rebel Yell, Whiplash Miles, just basically not going to happen. I mean, it's the same thing about Morrissey. When Morrissey releases his brand new album, Bonfire of Teenagers, if and when it ever comes out, my expectations for it are reasonable, I think. Of course, Morrissey is always pimping the new album as if it's the reincarnation of The Queen is Dead. I don't believe that's going to happen. I don't even believe that that's possible. I would say the same thing is true with Billy Idol. I don't think it's even possible at this point in time that Billy Idol is going to release Valley of the Dolls or Rebel Yell or Whiplash Smile. So my expectations for these albums are, make it as good as the last two. Make it as good as Devil's Playground. Make it as good as King and Queens of the Underground. Make it better than the Christmas album, which honestly is one of the worst things I've ever heard. No offense, Bill, I love you. I love Billy Idol. I never said I wouldn't. I would defend this guy to the death, but I don't necessarily want to hear him singing Silver Bells. Make it better than Charm Life, which is the worst album he's ever done. Now, ironically, I think Charm Life might be one of his best-selling albums, but to me, that album does not have a single good song on it. Even Cradle of Love, which might be one of the biggest songs he ever did, that song stinks. Now, the video, yes. The video, oh my God. If you are of the male persuasion and of a certain age, and you remember that music video, all you have to do is hear that guitar intro and you immediately impregnate your trunks. You don't have any choice. It's an instinct. So yes, make it better than Charm Life. Make it as good as the last two. And I would say that when it comes to this album, Dream Into It by Billy Idol, that yes, he accomplished that. This album is much better than Charm Life. In fact, I would probably go as far as to say that I think it's better than the last two albums. I think it's better than Devil's Playground. I think it's better than Kings and Queens of the Underground. Now, Devil's Playground, to me, that is an album I don't really go back and listen to very often. I remember it had been so long since Billy Idol had released an album when Devil's Playground came out. It had been, I think, 14 years or something like that since the whole cyberpunk debacle, since cyberpunk basically sent him into professional hibernation, that when the new album, Devil's Playground, was announced, I was reasonably excited about it. Now, my Billy Idol obsession had passed. I had long since moved into the world of Morrissey and all of that in terms of my obsessiveness, but it was an album that I was very curious about. I always keep tabs on what Billy Idol's doing. I'm still a huge fan to this day, but I remember I bought Devil's Playground right when it came out, and despite the fact that I think it does have a couple pieces of nice jinglage on it, I think for the most part that album is a little bit lackluster, whereas the last album he did, Kings and Queens of the Underground, I think, is an album that is actually pretty good. Much better than Devil's Playground, much better than Cyberpunk, I would argue. But at the end of the day, I think that this album is actually a little bit better. I love the artwork on this album. This album just came out this year. It was produced by somebody named Tommy English. Now, this vinyl for this record I really love. I love the packaging of this. I love the artwork. It's funny, on this particular sleeve, Billy Idol to me looks almost exactly like Mike Dirnt from Green Day. I don't know if that they've always looked that much alike or what, but to me it looks like he looks like Mike Dirnt from Green Day, but it's got really cool liner notes, and it comes on this really beautiful purple vinyl. This is a record that I have been listening to in relatively heavy rotation since it came out. Now, my first reaction to this record was that I didn't love it at first. To me, this album has been a little bit of a slow burn. Now, one cool thing I think about this album in terms of the songwriting is this is a much different album from Billy Idol in terms of his albums. Now, if you go back and you listen to the singles or the EPs that he's been releasing over the past couple of years, the Roadside EP and the Cage EP, I should say, this album is a little bit more in line with those. This album, to me, is very autobiographical. It's very personal. I like that. I like the fact that he's sort of gone in that direction. In fact, I would make the argument that this album is sort of the book Set to Music. If you have not read Billy Idol's book, Dancing with Myself, you have to check this book out. This is one of my favorite rock bios of all time. Of course, it's got all of the debauchery that you could ever want, which isn't necessarily always my favorite thing when it comes to these books. Yes, I love the stories, I love the chaos, but to me, what I really dweeb out on when it comes to the music books is I really dweeb out on creative inspiration and what it's like to write songs and be in a band and all the things that I've never really done. Yeah, the debauchery is fun, and this book's got plenty of it. This album, which is very autobiographical, has a lot of debauchery on it. But to me, what I really like is I like, hearing more about the music. And I think that in Billy Idol's book, I think what he does a good job of is balancing the debauchery and balancing that with a lot of the stuff that I'm more interested in. Anyway, the first song on this record is the title track called Dream Into It. Now, this is a song that I really like a lot. This song to me feels a lot like 80s Billy Idol, much more so than the last two albums, which are, of course, Devil's Playground and Kings and Queens of the Underground. Now, if you remember going back post Cyberpunk, Billy Idol did release one song post Cyberpunk as he was sort of in his professional hibernation, and that was he released the title track for the soundtrack to the movie Speed, which was the song Speed, which I like that song. It was a song that I liked a lot when it came out, but to me that song was sort of a precursor stylistically to the next two albums, Devil's Playground and Kings and Queens of the Underground, whereas this album I would say is a little bit more of what you'd expect from Billy Idol in terms of being a fan of 80s Billy Idol. This album has a lot more of an 80s feel to it. This song, musically, Dream Into It, to me, it sounds like something that you would hear on Rebel Yell or All Summer Single. In particular, the song actually really reminds me of the song All Summer Single on Whiplash Smile, which is actually my favorite song on Whiplash Smile. Like I said, I really like the song. It's very dreamy, it's whimsical, it's got a big sort of new wave post-punk kind of feel to it. This song is a reflection of youth. It references the early days of his career, and it also sort of looks to the future, realizing as he's getting older that he's got a lot less time ahead of him than he does behind him. Again, this is something that, Billy Idol, I think he sort of first dabbled in this sort of, this thematic topic on the Bitter Taste song, which was on the Roadside EP. Actually, Bitter Taste, I think, is one of the best songs that Billy Idol ever did. This album is sort of written in that same style in terms of being very autobiographical, kind of looking a lot to his past, sort of looking a little bit to his future. I really love this song. To me, it is one of the best songs on the album. The second song after that is a song called 77, which, to be perfectly honest with you, when this album was announced and I first saw the title track listing for the songs on this album, this was not one that I was particularly excited about, because this song features Avril Lavigne, who I'm not a fan of. She stinks. She always has stunk, you understand? But this is a song that I actually really like a lot. In fact, I don't even dislike Avril Lavigne's vocal performance on this song, which surprises me as much as anything else, because again, as soon as it was announced that this song featured Avril Lavigne, I basically dismissed it outright, because I'm just not a fan. I'm not a fan of Avril Lavigne. I never have been. I apologize if you are. I'm not throwing rocks at you. I just don't happen to agree with you. Now, this song, again, is very sort of 1980s Billy Idol. Now, the first song, I would say, is a little bit more all summer singly. It's a little bit down-tempo, whereas this song has that up-tempo Billy Idol Steve Stevens sound that is very recognizable. Billy Idol and Steve Stevens have a sound. They have a style that you know it as soon as you hear it. Now, let's not get nuts, okay? Let's not get crazy, shall we? This is not Morrissey Marr. This is not Bowie Ronson. This is not McCulloch Sargent, but this is a sound that is very recognizable. I think that is the thing that was lacking most in Billy Idol's career during the sort of charm life and cyberpunk era of his career. I talked about this when I ranked Billy Idol's albums on one of my videos a while back, that those albums in particular Charm Life, to me, that album does not have a single good song on it. Now, I'm not going to sit here and throw rocks at Mark Younger Smith. I'm sure that he's a good guitar player. I'm sure that he is a lovely guy. He seems like a very decent gent, but the thing I hate about that album, Charm Life, is I hate the guitar playing. I hate the sound of it. That album is so bland. It's so generic. There's nothing I like less, son, than vanilla blues. And to me, that album was a lame attempt by both Billy Idol and Mark Younger Smith to sort of play this sort of blues rock nothing. And it was even bland for blues rock. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think Stevie Ray Vaughan is about as bland as it gets. But if you want to water it down even more, go back and listen to Charm Life. That album stinks. But this album, this song in particular, it really has that Billy Idol, Steve Stevens magic that they do have. And that was one of the nice things when Billy Idol came back after his professional hibernation post-cyberpunk, when he came back with Speed and when he came back with Devil's Playground, was it was him and Steve Stevens again, and it has that recognizable sound. I love this song. I love this song. Instrumentally, again, like I said, Avril Lavigne's vocals don't even, bother me on it. Now, what this song makes me think of, and I always say this, now I'm not saying that this is what the song is about. This is what he's saying. I'm saying this is what it makes me think of. This song sort of paints the picture of two people, one of which is healthy, one of which is, the other one is either a friend or a spouse or a partner, and one of them is not well. One of them is nearing the end of their life, but they're giving their blessing to the other one to continue on, to go out, and they talk about go out and tear shit up like we did back in 1977. Again, this sort of makes me think of my dad and what he's going through with the passing of his wife. My dad still has a lot of life ahead of him, and unfortunately his wife, who was ill for a long time, recently left him, and this song sort of makes me think of him and what he's going through every time I hear it. Now, again, this is a song that I really like a lot. Now, one thing that's sort of funny is they talk about 1977, there's a lot of references to the early days of punk rock and sort of the subcultures and sort of some of the terminology that was popular back in around 1977. And what's funny is the song features Avril Lavigne again. Not really a big fan. I don't dislike her performance on this song, but it just sort of makes me laugh because Avril Lavigne is somebody that wasn't even born in 1977. But it doesn't really matter. It's a good song. I like it. The next song after that is a song that it's okay. It's not necessarily one of my favorites. The song is called Too Much Fun. Again, very autobiographical, very sort of true to some of the stories that you read in the book. It is basically a song that goes back and sort of, depicts a lot of the debauchery that Billy Idol went through back in his younger years. Basically a song saying, hey, you know what? I'm not really a guy that's going to go out on Friday night and have a few beers and a couple shots with my friends to blow off steam. I'm the guy that's going to lock himself into a hotel room with 20 pounds of heroin in Bangkok, and I ain't leaving until the military airlifts me out of the country in a helicopter. That's who I am. That's what this song is basically about. That's one of my favorite stories in Billy Idol's book, although I did mention the fact that some of the debauchery isn't always necessarily my favorite. But the song Too Much Fun, it's okay. It's definitely not my favorite song on the record. After that, a song that I'm going to be honest with you. In the spirit of full transparency, I can't be impartial. I can't be unbiased when it comes to the song John Wayne, because this song features somebody that I'm just not a fan of, that being Alison Mosshart. To me, I hate the Kills. To me, they are one of the worst bands of all time. I do not understand the appeal. If you are a fan of the Kills, I'm not saying this to start a tussle. I don't want to go outside, remove our shirts, and roughhouse. I'm just saying that they do absolutely nothing for me. And personally, I don't know her. Maybe my impression of her is wrong, but to me, Alison Mosshart is just a douchebag. I remember watching the Anthony Bourdain show, the one where he filmed here in Nashville. Now, he may have filmed multiple times in Nashville, but there was one in particular that he filmed here in Nashville, and he ended up hanging out with Alison Mosshart from the Kills. And I can tell you, just by watching that show, that episode of that show, I was not necessarily surprised by what came of Anthony Bourdain, because as soon as I found out what had happened to him, the first thing I thought of was, well, hanging out with Alison Mosshart would make me want to commit too. The song is called John Wayne. This song, sorry, it's my least favorite song on the record. When it comes to the Kills and Alison Mosshart, I can't do it, man. I can't practice impartiality. To find a positive thing about this song, which I always try to sort of skew towards the positive, is this song does have a cool instrumental track. I love the guitar work on this song. It has a sort of Billy Idol, Steve Stevens kind of edge and bite to it, but it also has a little bit of spaghetti western influence on it, which I think is awesome. Just can't do Alison Mosshart, son. I just can't do it. Now, I'm not going to beat this horse beyond recognition, but I just can't do it anyway. Next song after that is a song called Wild Side. This song sort of puts the record back on track as far as I'm concerned. This song features Joan Jett. I actually like this song a lot. Joan Jett is somebody that I'm sort of a casual fan of. I wouldn't say that I'm a huge fan of. I have seen Joan Jett live once or twice, and it was fine to go back and listen to Joan Jett records. I don't know, that's sort of a tall task for me, but I do remember having an ex-girlfriend that loved Joan Jett a lot. Her and I went to go see her at least once. I think it was maybe twice, but at least once, and it was fine. She's not somebody that I dislike, but I like this song a lot. I like this song because it sort of tells a story of, it's sort of a breakup song, but it's kind of done, it's sort of breaking up with a twist, because Billy Idol in this song basically says, you know what, it's not you, it's me. Look, I've slowed down a bit, but that animal still lives in here, and let's be honest with each other, I'm not really the button-down suburban 9-to-5 type. As much as I love you, I'm just not being true to myself, which is, in return, not fair to you, so I'm gone. I'm going to grab a 6-pack and I'm going to go out and I'm going to chase some foreign wool, and basically you're going to be left to your own devices. I really like this song a lot. I love the lyrical content to it. It is autobiographical, but at the same time, it's also very funny. I like Joan Jett's vocal performance on it. I would say that Wild Side is actually one of my favorite songs on the record. The next song after that is People I Love. This is another one of the songs on the record that I would sort of say is okay. Not necessarily my favorite song on the record, but I do love the guitar work, again, on this record. Steve Stevens obviously always shines, but he shines incredibly bright. On this record, again, this is sort of pretty self-explanatory when it comes to the lyrical content. This is an apology to the people that care about me. Look, I'm not an easy person to love. I dropped out of high school to start a punk rock band, and I'm basically the same guy I am. I'm basically the same guy I was then now, and I'm pretty much never going to change. So if I've pissed you off in the past, which I have a knack of, I do apologize for it. The song, like I said, it's one of my sort of mediocre songs on the record. Not necessarily my favorite, but the next song after that is a song called Gimme the Weight, another very autobiographical song. I love this song instrumentally. Again, I think Steve Stevens rules on this album. This song is another song kind of about the party days of the 1980s, 70s, and 1980s, probably into the 1990s. One of my favorite lyrics on the entire album is on this, or one of my favorite lyrics on the entire album is on this song, where he says, "I saw the world, but only hotel bars and bathrooms." I love that lyric. That is a very descriptive lyric that sort of paints a picture. The next song after that is a song called I'm Your Hero. Now, this song to me is awesome. This is a little bit more of a down-tempo song. This is a song that most reminds me of the song Bitter Taste, which came out a couple of years ago on the Roadside EP. Now, that is probably Bitter Taste. I mean, that is probably the best song that Billy Idol has done since 1986. Is certainly better than anything that's on this album. Now, I like a lot of the stuff that's on this album, but that song Bitter Taste, when that song Bitter Taste came out and the video came out for it, it absolutely blew me away. Now, I was not expecting output like that from Billy Idol at that stage of his career. Now, it did sort of, like I mentioned before, my expectations when it comes to these albums at this point in time and at this point in these artists' careers is something that's a little bit tempered, but I will say, based on some of the songs that he had been releasing on the last couple of EPs, it sort of raised my expectations a little bit. Now, this song most reminds me of Bitter Taste. It's not quite as good, but I really like the song. I'm Your Hero, the next song after that, closes out the album. I believe this was the first single that he released as a teaser for this album. This, to me, is the best song on the album. It's called Still Dancing. It's got that Billy Idol, Steve Stevens snarl. Very autobiographical. This song talks a lot about his career, how it could have ended, how his life could have ended. I think for a lot of us who are longtime Billy Idol fans, as I am, I remember, as I mentioned before, my Billy Idol fandom was sort of born back in 1994. Now, that was a year after the whole cyberpunk debacle came out, and it seemed as if Billy Idol's career was pretty much over back in those days. I remember thinking to myself, this guy's probably done. He's probably not going to release another album ever again. He may not ever tour again, because Cyberpunk, although I like Cyberpunk, it's an album that I always defend as a Billy Idol fan. In fact, back in the 1990s, when I was at the height of my Billy Idol obsession, that was the album I feel like I talked the most about with people, because it was still semi-current at the time, and that album bombed on such an epic scale. Now, there are albums that are disappointing, there are albums that flop, there are albums that bomb, and there are albums that dismantle your entire career, and that's basically what Cyberpunk did. Now, ironically, to me, Cyberpunk is a much better album than Charm Life, despite the fact that Charm Life may have been, at least at the time of its release, it may have been Billy Idol's most successful album. But to me, Charm Life stinks, man. I've mentioned it. I'm not trying to be negative. That album sucks. I would take Cyberpunk every day. In fact, I still to this day think that Cyberpunk is probably 50 to 60% pretty listenable. And you go back and you look at Cyberpunk and look at the timing of Cyberpunk. At the height of the grunge revolution, to go out and make an album that was sort of techno-pop, techno-punk influenced, I think it took onions. I think it was brave. Billy Idol was never going to be able to pull off the grunge thing, so why not go as far in the opposite direction as possible? I respect it. I respected it at the time, but it is an album that really almost ended his career. In fact, I remember when Billy Idol came back out, the first time I saw him live, which was back in probably 2001 or 2002 maybe, I saw him at the Showbox in Seattle. It was the first time I ever saw Billy Idol live, and he was playing in front of a reasonably small crowd. So from 2000, 2001 to maybe whatever it was to today, where his career's back totally almost as big as it was in the 1980s. I mean, Billy Idol is either playing here in Nashville soon or just did. I didn't go, but I've seen Billy Idol many, many times over the years. I've seen him in very intimate sort of settings. And to go see him at the NHL hockey arena in Nashville for $200-$300 isn't really anything that appeals to me. I have a lot of great memories seeing Billy Idol. If you haven't seen him live, I would definitely recommend it. He kills it. He is a pro. I mean, I've never seen Billy Idol even halfway mail in a show, but for him to sort of come back after the whole Cyberpunk debacle and rebuild his career to the point it is now, I think, is nothing short than admirable. I mean, the guy's playing arenas again, which who does that who does that at the age of 70? Who rebuilds their careers from the ashes of Cyberpunk to 20, 30 years later being able to tour and play arenas again and put out a record that is as good as this? He also talks about in this song how his life should have ended many times over again. I mean, you go back and you read through the history of rock and roll, so many of the people that have passed away have lived a third of the life that Billy Idol has lived in terms of craziness and drugs and alcohol and motorcycle accidents and all the things that could have taken this guy out over the years. But he's still here, he's still breathing, and that's the cool thing about this song. I think that's why I love this song so much, is because this song just reeks of gratitude. This song reeks of somebody that loves life, that feels fortunate to be here. This song is like humble. It reeks of humility. You don't think of Billy Idol as being somebody that is known for their humility, but this song is very grateful. This song is awesome. I love it. I think it is easily the best song on this record, probably the best song that he has done since the song Bitter Taste, which was on the Roadside EP. Anyway, I very much heavily recommend checking out this album. Now, this is an album, I realize that I'm a little bit late in doing a review for an album because this album has probably been out for about a month. I usually try to do my reviews for these records in a more reasonable time frame, but I've been really busy over the past month or so. I realize that that's a totally cliche thing to say. I mentioned this when I relaunched the channel after a hiatus, that my wife and I have recently entered into the world of home ownership, which unfortunately has definitely sort of taken a bite out of the time I have to spend in the toy aisle of life. I mean, whoever it was that said the first year of home ownership is nothing nice, they weren't just whistling Dixie, son. But apart from that, as I mentioned earlier, I was also out in California, back home for a week. So I'm a little bit tardy when it comes to putting out a record review for this album, because this album isn't brand new anymore. But in a sense, I'm sort of grateful that I got a chance to sit on this album a little bit longer, because this is an album, the first couple times I listened to it, I didn't necessarily think it was hyper snug, but the more I've been listening to it, the more it's sort of grown on me. To me, this is an album that I would highly recommend. It's definitely been a little bit of a slow burn. Now, there are songs on this record that I don't really like at all, but I would say that this album is probably 60 to 70% Jug certified. Certainly an excellent effort by somebody that is 70 years old, somebody that's been in the music industry for almost 50 years. So check it out. I think that you'll like it if you haven't already. If you are a fan of Billy Idol, I don't think it disappoints. It certainly didn't disappoint me. Anyway, man, this is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store like Melody Records out in Chico, California. I was just back home a couple of weeks ago, and unfortunately, I didn't have time to stop in on Melody Records, but I will be back home in July for more of a planned trip, at which point in time, I will remedy that situation. I love that place. I always love stopping in there anyway. Check back for Morrissey Monday, a celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths, as well as album reviews and record content throughout the week. And, I mean, unless you've got anything else, I think that's just about going to do her. So until next time, my friends, talk to you then.